Good day, Minister Gordhan. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. This is for our InsideOUTA broadcast, and I think to start off with, last time we met sort of formally, you were being moved out by Jacob Zuma. Church Square was alive with activity. A week later, the country rose up, civil society drove an immense campaign on the back of just that bad decision by the President Zuma at the time. How did you feel about that energy that really got behind you? The nation was now fed up with that decision.
Well, firstly, thank you for this privilege of interacting both with yourself and your constituency as well. And secondly, clearly OUTA and all of the civil society fraternity have played a critical role both in 2016 and 2017, and hopefully that will continue into the coming years as well, because the struggle to have a truly working democracy and a state that actually belongs to and is serving the people of South Africa is not over yet. The battle is still on, and I think all of us are very aware that what we have before us is a remarkable turn of events since December 2017, but also what all of us are describing as a fight back, whether it's through the courts or particular sets of attorneys and advocates, and there's a fair amount of resources behind that. Coming back to March last year, or 2017, it's a short time. It was indeed momentous because it not really from a personal sense, but what we had then was a indication that the level of confidence of those who had captured the state had reached a particular pinnacle, that they could be brazen enough to say we disregard the markets or we disregard the population in South Africa, and that we could get away with it. And what followed a few months later, as we all know, is the Gupta emails and other disclosures which actually placed those sorts of actions prior to March 2017 and after March 2017 in some kind of perspective. It also was a period in which Parliament reactivated itself through the Eskom inquiry, and others in Parliament wanted to conduct similar inquiries as well. And just the appearance of Eskom officials, the minister at the time, board members, the lying that was happening in Parliament, notwithstanding that there was a potential threat of perjury charges that they could actually face, was again indicative of the brazenness with which all of those things could be done, particularly in a context where there was a knowledge sitting, if you like, behind the scenes, which was saying you can go ahead and do whatever you like, lie as much as you like, because you won't be prosecuted at the end of the day. So in that context, civil society had played several roles. Firstly, understanding the significance of these events for the larger politics of our country and the democracy as a whole. Secondly, acting as mobilizers and catalysts for the public to be better informed about what was really going on. Then propagating, if you like, the connection of the dots and the work subsequently done by several academics, which produced the Betrayal of the Promise report, which gave us, if you like, a hypothesis to work with, which has now repeatedly proven itself to be reasonably correct in terms of the way in which state capture actually works. And also the creation of a unity of purpose amongst civil society organizations, which was for the benefit both of themselves in learning how to put a broad front together and being able to work with a variety of leaders from different backgrounds on the one hand, but also demonstrating to the capturers, so to speak, and the public that there could be voices outside of political parties who have as profound an interest in the working of democracy and building of a truly democratic state, in as much as political parties might have that interest as well. But let me qualify that by saying that peaks of interest and mobilization has to be matched by a level of sustenance that is provided. In other words, continuation, not necessarily at the peak level, but one of the challenges that civil society organizations have to look at is to sustain that level of activity, the level of interest amongst the public, because whilst many members of the public appear to be able to put some picture together of what is going on, I think there's a lot of work that can still be done, particularly by civil society, but by other organs as well, to explain to people what they lose as a result of the stealing that happens from the state and the kind of corrupt activities that continue even till today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess that civil society must be careful not to drop its guard, is what you're saying. There's been some good move, but there's still so much to be done. And this is where we grapple with our changing role as civil society. While at this at one stage, or on one sense, you want to reward and speak up the good work, but there's still this impatience. There's still this need for us to hold government to account, to put the pressure on, never take it off, because we've got to get out of this hole. And it's tough at stages for civil society to keep nailing or knocking the issues that are concerned, even though they were brought about historically. And yet you're trying to fix that. That must be quite frustrating at the same time. But do you get where civil society is coming from in that regard?
No, sure. But that's something we've learnt as activists over the years, that you have peaks and troughs in any mobilizing activity, firstly. But secondly, that mobilization has to be related to an increased level of organization. So the more people become involved, the higher the possibility is that some of them will sustain the interest in a more organized form over a period of time. So there's a relationship between mobilizing people and increasing the organizational capacity of each of the entities that might be involved in this. And it's getting that relationship right and continuing with that cycle of increasing mobilization, increasing awareness and consciousness of what is really happening, creating a broader and broader understanding and a deeper understanding of what is going on. And that then informs the kind of and the quality of organizations that you actually have on the one hand. But the second challenge, as you correctly point out, is what in the old days we would have called the forms of engagement. So how do you engage with the state, or how do you engage with other organizations outside of the familiar circles that all of us might move in from time to time, and what forms of struggle do you actually initiate? By that I mean, one day it's appropriate to have a march, on another day it might be appropriate to occupy a building, on the third day it might be appropriate to go to court and litigate on a particular matter. And so the forms of engagement or the forms of struggle will change depending on the context in which one finds oneself. And I think the key is to equip more and more activists with a wider and wider set of options and an understanding of which option is best utilized in what circumstance. But there too, that's not a textbook. It's something that you learn, you evolve, you get involved in struggles, you have a few knocks on the nose and scrapes of the knee, and then you begin to acquire more and more experience in terms of how this is actually going to happen. But I think there's room for civil society to, in a sense, reunify around the fight back now. Because the ground that might have been gained is ground that can very easily be lost, because those who want to reinstate state capture with the purpose of continuing the pillage and continuing patronage politics and so on, still have enough resources in one form or another,
Seems like.
in order to at least attempt to win back some of the ground on the one hand, and secondly, have enough resources to be a disruptive factor to good governance at the end of the day.
We see that playing out, and almost picture a new president who we really respect with his hands tied behind his back, almost immobilized because there's an election coming up, there's politics at play in the background, and one gets this sense, but at the same time, as civil society, we get many requests from the public, what's happening, why isn't it happening fast enough, is this, and to placate and say, we need to be guarded, we need to be measured, we need to not knee-jerk react, because as you say, we have to reinvent ourselves as civil society to be relevant all the time. One thing that was missing for so long is this call from civil society to engage with government, or for government to be engaging. And a couple of years ago, the presidency put out this anti-corruption task team, but where there was a talk shop. It's time that civil society and government walk hand in hand, so much more, because that's what it was like in the past. How do you see that playing out going forward? Because we have an absolute desire to find the solutions with government, as opposed to be on the outside, seeming like we're just throwing stones. We really want to be constructive in this.
That's an important point. It takes me back to around late 98 and early 99, when President Mandela had already indicated, I'm not coming back to a second term in office. And at a number of talks, he would say that there are good people in every organization, and there are even good people in what are considered to be opposition parties. And it is the responsibility of these good people to stand up and talk with a collective voice and defend democracy and advance its interests at the end of the day. And that if they don't do that, then it's the so-called bad people who will thrive and perhaps succeed as well. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. So it's the good people, be it in civil society or in various political parties, or outside of that, in various other formations, who need to recognize that there is a common cause that we have to fight, and that common cause is to continue to promote a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic South Africa. Firstly. Secondly, we got to recognize that there's a new sense of urgency that needs to be applied to transforming the lives of ordinary South Africans.
Absolutely.
And with that transformation must come a significant transformation, some might call it radical transformation, of the economic structure of our society, because too many people, after 25 years or 24 years of democracy, still remain excluded from the benefits of participating reasonably equally in the kind of economy that we currently have and hope to build in the near future. So it's around that equation that we require the common purpose. But secondly, we also need to recognize that elections, each time they come, happen in a particular context. And depending on the context, certain political parties will resort to what are extraordinary measures in order to win support for themselves. And you can see there's elements of fascist behavior, elements of populist behavior, and elements of racist behavior. Right now, that's taking our politics and allowing it to sink fairly significantly to a level that could create, I think, many problems for us into the future. And so again, it's a responsibility that all of us have to continually interact with the public and share perspectives with the public, which opens their eyes beyond the self-interest that they might feel or the grievance that they might feel at a particular point in time to the wider issues that are actually at play. But at the same time, you've got to have programs across the board which will ensure that people see direct benefits and impact of all of these policies, and resources being mobilized, both from the private sector and the public sector, that impact must be felt by people in terms of the changes they experience in their lives. And that's perhaps another role that civil society needs to look at more carefully, and that is, whilst normally the dynamic is one between government and civil society and citizens, there's in South Africa a very resourceful and powerful private sector.
Yes.
Right? And we've seen good examples through the CEO initiative and so on during 2016-17 of the kind of activism that some business leaders were able to get involved with and make an impact in both for themselves and on the scene politically as well. Similarly, Labour is a major constituency.
Yeah.
Whilst they face some immediate challenges in terms of their constituency, they can also come to the party and begin to introduce their resources as well.
Yeah.
Now, how do we raise each of ourselves to a level where self-interest and national interest is balanced in the right kind of way is, I think, the challenge that leaders from all of these constituencies have at the moment.
You're absolutely right. One of our frustrations has always been business sort of missing in action, taking decisions that they don't want to rock the boat of government. They do business with government, we understand that, and government has a lot of power over them with regulations. And so there was a real need for government for business to stand up, and every time they did, they got nailed. The real causes of the world and the Harrises, and that was concerning for us. So we're a bit concerned about business because there's a new normal required in the auditing industry and so forth, and we're not seeing enough action there. So what we'd hope is that government does drive this narrative of remove the fear and be brave enough to challenge us, because we can't leave it up to civil society. We're the poor cousins out there, and there's a lot of work. So we do want to work hand in hand. That's the message. At the same time, holding government to account is a challenge for us, and really that's the drive that we would like to see government initiate. Do you think that can happen?
Yeah, I mean, there are indications from the president, for example, that he wants things done differently.
Yeah.
So state capture and corruption is on the agenda. I think the lead has been given in the State of the Nation address. We've got to follow it through. Transformation in the state-owned enterprises is part of that agenda. All of us can participate, labor, civil society, and business, in ensuring that these entities become sustainable, stable, and contribute in a positive way. The third is around issues around land, but that land issue also exemplifies the whole question of what assets are in the hands of the majority of South Africans. How do we give 50% of the unemployed youth some kind of hope and positivity, so that they don't become easily tempted by this fascist populist rhetoric that some are able to exercise in certain ways as well. So in some respects, government will lead, but the job summit, the investment summit that the president has in mind, are two opportunities that are coming up for everybody to follow the lead on the one hand, but also be proactive in asking the question, what can I contribute in that particular environment? How can I be part of changing attitudes in South Africa? Because there's the soft side. And the soft side is how do we get people to respect each other more? How do we understand our diversity more? How do we respect each other's culture more?
Be more tolerant.
More tolerant, more accepting of the kind of South Africa we really are.
And we got so far down that road in the Madiba days, and then this seems to be undone.
It won't entirely be undone, I think.
No.
2010, for example, while the World Cup is on in Russia, was a good moment.
Was brilliant.
Right. So there will be punctuated moments like that, where opportunities will arise for South Africans to think together, work together, and act together. We need to create more of those opportunities.
Absolutely. And the IRR has done some great research which says that what it seems like out there, driven those narratives by social media, is not the reality. We are tolerant. We do respect each other on the whole, and we've got so much going for us in that regard. We've just got to energize.
You got to build on the positive.
Yeah. So just from our side, Minister, you were very guarded. You were politically correct while you were still a minister under Jacob Zuma's rule. I could see you biting your tongue. You were asked poignant questions which we knew you wanted to answer but couldn't, and then you were free to be that person that you have become, that person who stood up for almost a lonely figure at times as a politician standing up. There were a few of you out there, not many, and we want to just congratulate you and say thank you for that moral courage and saying it as it is. I think that's brought you back into the fold again to go and do the repair that has to be done.
Well, you know, there's a whole lot of us and the kind of generation we belong to who became activists in the 70s and maybe early 80s in some cases. So we've been political activists, and I remain a political activist, not a politician. I don't look for office. If the job is given to me, and if we think we can do it, we do it. So it's been a privilege to contribute, and there are still many brave people. And often we want to judge brave people by what they say in the media, whereas there are different fora in which brave people operate, and they choose particular moments and particular actions in order to demonstrate where they stand on a planet, which the public might not see. So for example, if you're sitting in a closed committee meeting of an organization, the media is not there to see what a Derek Hanekom said or didn't say, or what an Aaron Motsoleri said or didn't say. Equally, if you are in structures of government, there would be particular ways of working. Not all of the people have respected that, by the way. So one day we'll write about that stuff. But it does take a formidable amount of forbearance and sometimes courage to stay in there, because the easiest thing to do when you're faced with difficulties is to say, I have the option of resigning. I can go enjoy my family life or do something else. But many people have stuck in there in order to be continued agents of change. And so to your constituency, thanks for the contribution you make. There's a lot more work to do. We need to generate a whole new bunch of youngsters who also understand our past, understand the present, introduce their dimensions of thinking, which is going to be different from my generation, for example, but that will invigorate all of us. And to have a generation of people in their late 20s and 30s who are as passionate as previous activists were about the future of the country, of building non-racialism and non-sexism, and making democratic institutions work, and going into government and providing their capabilities to serve the country as a whole, even if for 5 or 7 years, is the kind of new ethic that I think we want to develop over time.
So, Minister, we know that, and we've watched the slide of these SOEs over the last, and if we look at the financial statements going back the last decade and the revaluing of assets, the borrowings against that, the manipulation almost of balance sheets, but just the craziness. The hole is big in all of them. We could see you fighting SAA from the Treasury point of view at the time. What are we going to do? How are we going to turn these state-owned institutions around? Because they have such a valuable role to play. They have so many good people employed, good engineers. We need them, and yet they've been decimated.
Well, there again, as I said, the President has set out the script in the State of the Nation address, which says review the governance, change the boards, look at the management, and if they're crooks, get rid of them. Obviously through legal processes, look at the financial sustainability of these outfits and stabilize that where it is appropriate. Eventually look at the operating and business models, because some of these entities are not self-sustaining in the way in which they work at the moment, and take away the dependence on the fiscus. the so-called bailout phenomenon that many of the entities have relied on from time to time, either in the form of guarantees or injections of money. And at the end of the day, have a stable of SOEs or SOCs that are in line with and aligned to the national purpose. Meaning, if you are there to provide electricity or rail transport for export industries or import industries, do your job and do it efficiently. And don't cook the figures in order to make yourselves look good. When somebody starts looking a year later, you then begin to see the fault lines emerging in that particular regard. But ultimately, it goes beyond that as well. As you know, the President has established a Presidential SOC Council. So the idea there, once it starts operating fairly soon, is to look at all the critical SOCs. We have over 700 of them of different types. But there are probably about 10 or 15 that are really critical in money terms, but also in terms of key services that they deliver to South Africans. And ask the question, which is a point one of the board members of one of the entities made to me in the last few days, that if you take the assets of all of those entities, that's a humongous amount of money that we're talking about. So if we do effectively stabilize them, that asset base is a very valuable asset base to begin to think through a 10 or 15-year scenario in terms of how they could become a lot more effective, both individually and as a collective. And there are many examples in the world, the Temasecs of Singapore, the Casecs of China, and so on, where a range of models are provided in terms of how the asset base of these outfits can actually be better used. But the key right now is to understand where the malfeasance is. And as you've seen, we've changed any number of boards. We're beginning to look at new management teams in several instances as well. And it's going to require some very creative thinking to reposition these entities so that they become commercially and financially viable. So that's going to be a huge challenge.
I imagine whole business models being looked at, the finance structures, and hopefully one of the things we're looking to these new boards is to go and hold those previous boards to account. We've been saying this for some time. It's actually a fiduciary duty, we would imagine, and hopefully you're going to empower them to do that, because they've got the minutes of the meetings, they've got the contracts, they can see what was happening. We struggle.
They don't need any empowerment. The Companies Act is very clear about what your fiduciary responsibilities are. So all you have to do is show something that we often take for granted is courage and leadership. So you can be the most efficient of professionals in a particular discipline, but if you lack the courage, then you're wasting your time.
That's it.
So in many of these instances, courage is the key factor. Am I willing to do the right thing, notwithstanding how unpopular I might be, or the crises that I might actually have to go through? And as I pointed out earlier on, there is a fight back element. So you take a person off a board or off the management, and they can go into extensive litigation. And the question is, where are those resources coming from? Because often the litigation or the so-called fight back is only to go back to the old status quo. Not necessarily to improve the condition, in this instance, of a particular SOE. So I re-emphasize that there's still a long, hard battle to be fought, probably for the next year or two.
So then, just to wrap up, I'd like to just hop on that point that you could have given up. I spoke to your wife outside the Hawks when the pressure was on you and all the false cases were being brought, all the trumped-up charges. And I got a sense that your personal life, it was pressure, it was immense pressure. And you could have said, I don't need this, and moved on, but you stuck true to your cause. You stood and realized that change has to happen. And we want to thank you for that, and thank you for your time, Minister.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.